What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and the new release event for Warhammer 40k Leviathan is over. The battle for Ogrim has been won by the Tyranids. Now, for those who don't know, this was a kind of fun campaign-style community event. Players from around the world played games with the Leviathan set and submitted the results of those combat patrol-style games, and the faction with the highest win rate got their previews from the upcoming codex first. Now, Tyranids and Space Marines are both on the docket for codexes. They are going to be the first two codexes to be released for Warhammer 40k 10th edition, and we've seen all of the new models for Tyranids, thanks to their victory. So what we're going to do today is just run down through the new Tyranid previews that we've gotten for their codex release, and some stuff that we can maybe glean from the sculpts themselves, and also just talk about how cool these miniatures are, because holy crap, do they look good. The first kits that we see are for Termagaunts and Hormagaunts. It looks like these two little guys are retaining their own independent kits and got some really nice new sculpts to go along with them. Hormagaunts especially have been old and outdated for so long. Their sculpts were terrible and spindly, and while it doesn't look like these new ones are any less spindly than the old ones, they are a lot more highly detailed and they look very cool. Real predatory velociraptor vibes coming off these guys. The Termagaunts are largely just the Termagaunts from the Leviathan set, but we see their alternate weapon options being represented with some new inclusions. The Warhammer community article discusses symbiotic bioweapons being added to the Termagant units, including some Old Faithfuls. We do have original alternate weapons that we had in the previous version of the kit from Fleshborers, Spinefists, and Devourers, but now we have the Termagant special weapons returning, and these haven't seen a representation on the model for like 20 years. Back in 2nd edition, Termagants had a wide variety of war gear options and they could take some special weapons. And there were stats for those in 8th edition as well. In the transition over, all of these special weapon models actually got discontinued. But it also looks like there are some new ones making an appearance. We see shard launchers, strangle webs, and spike rifles all being represented and discussed in the article. Now that's super exciting, and I think is definitely trying to cement Termagants as the more range-oriented kind of support unit, and especially with things like strangle webs and shard launchers, I hope that these will have unique effects that they can target enemy models with. It looks like shard launchers are similar to the weapons that Barbgaunts have, at least it looks almost identical on the miniature, so maybe we'll see some sort of suppression effect. Strangle webs could slow things down or be effective anti-infantry weapons. There are obviously a lot of interesting possibilities here. Next up, we have the new Lictor reveals, and these are absolutely nuts. One thing that I really like about this reveal is that it looks like Games Workshop is almost pushing a sub-theme within the codex of these forward deploy stealthy Lictor-style models within the Tyranid faction. We now have not only just the Lictors and Death Leaper like we did previously, but we also have Von Ryan's Leapers, an infantry option that's a little bit more numerous for them, that came out of Leviathan, and now also a character for them, the Neurolictor. I appreciate as well that there is an aesthetic through line for all these Lictors. They now have this really kind of vicious, segmented appearance and have a lot more of that flexible flesh than a lot of the other Tyranid forms do. They definitely mesh in with the Von Ryan's Leaper look. The Lictors themselves look absolutely phenomenal. It looks like there are two poses for them, maybe that you get a couple of them in a box and you can assemble them however you want. The Neurolictor is basically the happy medium between a Neurotyrant and a Lictor. It has a lot of the accoutrements of a Neurotyrant, including all these tentacles, the long whip-like tail, and obviously the big brain with the crown of chitin around it. Not to mention the fact that it's blind like a lot of the other psychic units. According to this article, it does mention that they're granted the ability to mask their presence by confounding enemies, and that sounds to me like they would grant some sort of lone operative effect to Von Ryan's Leapers, but it might also be that this is another independent model that has unique support effects, kind of like the other Lictors. And if that's the case, I am worried that between Death Leaper, this model, and the natural Lictor, assuming that these datasheets don't get wildly revamped in the new codex, there's going to be a lot of this lone operative style unit that will probably see some crossover. It also discusses a wave of psychic dread, some sort of effect that can terrify enemies in an aura around them. It probably does battle shock things. I'm not honestly that excited about that kind of thing. Maybe gives you like -1 to leadership checks or something. To be fair, that's also already what Death Leaper does. So it sounds like there's maybe a little bit of overlap there. Last but certainly not least, we do have the Death Leaper model. This was actually previewed on Instagram ages ago, and we've known about it for a couple weeks. So it's not brand spanking new information, but it is a pretty cool model. It does have a big cool trench coat, which means that Death Leaper's the angstiest boy in high school. It's a little bit of an odd choice to kind of include a fashion accessory as like a biological construct, but I do like the aesthetic. And I do think it's kind of cool that it could be some sort of like chameleon skin that adapts to its environment, maybe forms into a different texture, kind of like an octopus where they change the composition of their skin so they blend into their surroundings. I can kind of, you know, forge the narrative in my head about what this coat is for. I do appreciate as well that Death Leaper is very much a cross between the classic Lictor, the ones that we see elsewhere in this article, and also the Neurolictor, because it has that head tail that the Neurolictor has as well. So it's definitely fitting right into this Lictor sub-theme. And that sub-theme is even getting its own detachment, the Vanguard Assault Detachment, that allows Death Leaper to act as your warlord. If we see powerful detachments for each of these different Tyranid sub-archetypes, that could be very cool, from Monster Mash to Horde Mode to obviously these Vanguard organisms one, and I hope that they're all actually competitive against one another. One downside of those is that we've seen in the past things like, you know, the Phobos Army of Renown for Space Marines previously had a lot of interesting Phobos interactions, but didn't really address the weaknesses that an all Phobos Space Marine army would have created. And I hope that they learn their lesson from mechanics like that, but we'll just have to see. Next up is the new Biovore and Pyrovore kit. And this one is such an aesthetic departure from the previous incarnation of the Biovore. It is absolutely wild. It actually boggles the mind that they would consider this to be the same unit. I can definitely see that there is some sort of aesthetic evolution from the previous Biovore. You can kind of tell that the protrusions on the gun are a little similar to the previous Biovore, but other than that, I mean, this thing is a big spider with a gun like growing out of its abdomen. It's nothing like the old Biovore that was a little squat orc dude who's, you know, the top of whose head ended in a gun. But the look and feel of this model is absolutely amazing. It almost reminds me of the original Exocrine from Armorcast that had huge front plates and the gun would sort of protrude off the back of it. In fact, I imagine that that's where a lot of this aesthetic sensibility came from. And they're drawing a lot on the old, you know, OG first and second edition Tyranid models. And honestly, in some situations that's been a miss. I think the Screamer Killer model is like not amazing, and some of the models from Leviathan that uses those old aesthetics don't look great. This one, on the other hand, looks amazing. I also appreciate that the gun looks functional. I mean, I don't want to get shot by that thing. You can tell that there's like sort of musculature sculpted into the barrel of the gun, so it's definitely like using a peristaltic motion to force these spore mines out of its gullet. A very evocative model. Now, I'd be interested to see whether or not these use the same data sheet as the existing Biovore, because it does not look anything like the little tiny artillery infantryman that we've seen previously. This is an armored anti-tank vehicle. It honestly looks like the Tyranid hive mind has evolved like a self-propelled tank hunter with just this little thing that's heavily armored and just blows up armored vehicles with an enormous, like wildly oversized ranged weapon. I also wonder if you can assemble the gun firing parabolically. If it's still supposed to be an indirect fire artillery piece, it wouldn't make so much sense for it to be leveled directly at its target. It would probably want to sort of pivot up a little bit, so I wonder if that is an option. It looks like the little legs on the gun potentially have some mutability to them, so you might be able to kind of move it around a little bit, which would be actually really cool, especially for having multiple Biovores in your army. One thing that's hilarious is that it actually looks like this thing is on a bigger base, maybe an oval base potentially. I already have original Biovores. These are the second edition Biovores, and they're on the current base. They were originally shipped with a 40mm, but they went up to 60mm in the 8th edition re-release, I think, of the Biovore kit. And these little guys are so dwarfed by this base. And if this base gets any bigger, this model's gonna look silly as hell. It already is kind of silly, but If I have to rebase my Biovores one more time, they're gonna look so dwarfed. But also, this model's so cool that I kind of just want to replace them anyway. The other thing included in the kit is the Pyrovore. This is finally a Biovore Pyrovore dual kit, so we no longer have that problem of not being able to source Pyrovores anywhere. And the Pyrovore, similar to the Biovore, it looks a lot more heavily armored than it did previously. The gun with all of its sort of digestive sacs looks almost more like a Spore Mine launcher than the Biovore's gun does. Now, if it retains a similar profile to the one that it has right now, this big armored tail doesn't really match the type of unit that the Pyrovore is, which is mostly sort of a cheaper utility unit that situationally debuffs enemy models. Now, we also have a redesign of the Genestealers. I don't know if I have too much to say about these. They're mostly just a higher fidelity version of the current Genestealers, and they look good, I guess. The current Genestealers are definitely showing their age. They don't really match up well against the more recent kits, although they're definitely not the worst thing in 40k. And it looks like these ones are on larger bases and are a lot more highly detailed. They also have nice looking carapace plating on their back. A lot of their old mouth weapons are being represented, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not those have different war gear options in the new codex. Now, last but certainly not least is the new heavy Tyranid monster, and this one has been spoiled for quite a while. I think we've had this in artwork being represented and shown in the back of pieces for a long time. This is the Norn Emissary, or also the Norn Assimilator. Now, the background of these is really interesting because Norn queens have been part of the Tyranid backstory for a really long time. They're sort of like spaceship-sized organisms that birth new Tyranids and manipulate their genetic code to adapt to particular situations, environments, and enemies. Having this unit that is kind of a direct link to the Norn Queen is actually really cool. It kind of makes it sound like they are the new incarnation of what old Hive Tyrants used to be. Previously, Hive Tyrants were a psychic threat, fast, melee-oriented, they could take ranged weapons. And now the Norn Emissary is described as using a combination of brute strength, incredible psychic power, and an unnatural degree of agility for a creature its size. So, if you liked Hive Tyrants in the past, I have a sneaking suspicion this is going to be the new Hive Tyrant. I mean, we got the new Hive Tyrant datasheet in the Tyranid Codex, and especially based on what Hive Tyrants could do in previous editions, it was really sad the glow down they got into an almost entirely support unit in the 10th edition codex. However, it looks like the Norn Emissary might fulfill that role. Now, what's interesting is that we're kind of getting this confirmation that this big brainy style, where we have exposed neural tissue, these big folded brains on these large units, is basically going to be the new hallmark of Synapse creatures. We saw that not only with the Lictor, but also obviously the Neuro Tyrant. Basically, all of these Synapse creatures have had these big, enlarged, and gorged brain sections. Now, we've also got its alternative build, the Norn Assimilator, and it looks like this is a little bit less support-oriented and much more designed for combat. And that does open up the option to maybe take armies of like 6 of these things, if they're very good, which could be absolutely amazing, and that would be super cool. And I love big Monster Mash lists, so I mean, sign me right up for that. We also do see it in a little bit of a head-to-head with a Wraith Lord here, and it looks like while the Wraith Lord may be in the foreground a little bit, it doesn't look like the Norn Emissary is or the Norn Assimilator in this case is actually too much taller than the Wraith Lord, so we could probably see these things at, 5-ish inches tall, which is definitely a little bit smaller than you would hope for, I guess, but as an evolution of the Hive Tyrant, it kind of makes sense to be at that level. Altogether, this model, just like the other ones that are being previewed right now, look amazing. The aesthetic direction that Leviathan was going in, I didn't really love, but these ones kind of mesh that alongside the 3rd edition Tyranid release, where all the Tyranids had this very codified, very defined aesthetic sense. They all looked like they were the same organism, and models like this and the Biovore kind of thread the needle between those in a really nice way that looks super good and makes the entire army look consistent. But these, having these bizarre kind of eldritch shapes coming out the back with these huge spore chimneys, plus the big, huge carapace armor plating, especially on the Norn Assimilator, look absolutely awesome. That Tyrant Guard kind of hooded, cowled look is one of my favorites, and this thing captures that perfectly. So altogether, I don't think there's really anything that has been shown off that I don't super love. The Neuro Lictor, the Psychic Lictor, might be my least favorite out of all of them, but I don't think it's particularly bad, and it does mesh well with some of the recent releases. I mentioned the Neuro Tyrant, and also the Parasite of Mortrax looks pretty similar. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about these insane previews from Battle for Ogrim. Let me know what you are hoping for out of the Space Marine half of these reveals. And big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and happy wargaming.